Hello, maybe? Yeah, hi. There we go. Hey, welcome to the program this afternoon. Um, yeah, we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. Just give people a chance to know what's happening. Um, so if you're watching after the fact, feel free to skip ahead a couple minutes. For everybody joining us live, welcome. We're going to get started at 12:30. So I'm just going to go through, make sure everything's working, and maybe tell you a little bit about what's coming up soon. But there should be a good program today. I'm excited to share it with you today. Yeah, that's working. Great. So for those of you joining live, we're gonna do this. Again, I always encourage if you're interested, feel free, or something occurs to you. Oop, why is it? Okay, sorry, screwing myself up here. Always feel free to include any comments or questions or anything that you might have during the course of this. I might not have time during the program, but I will definitely get to it at the end if I can. But also just, it's nice to know that people are there and enjoying it or confused by it or whatever the case might be. Okay. So I guess, so today we're going to continue our theme of April Fool's Month. So some of the myths, misconceptions, and mistakes and things like that that we have in our community and the way that we've, been telling our history. Okay. Coming up next weekend, so not this weekend coming up, but on the 23rd, right? We have the right date for this? Yeah, good. We have our next History Speaks lecture. It's going to be about the Wassa group, specifically the people of it and who made them up, and what they got up to, and why we still talk about them, over a century later. So that'll be a great program. That'll be in person. If you want to come by the museum and on that Saturday, looking for something to do, feel free to come in. And it's nice to see people's faces again while we do these. It may not be live streamed as we've done in the past, just because of the technical stuff. But we will be recording it, so it will be going up shortly, at least by the following Monday. So if you can't make it, you're not in town or you're busy, it will be available. But we're gonna try to shoot to have it live for people if you want to come to as well. All right. I think I'm just going to jump into this. Oop, there we go. Hi. Yeah, so today, for History Chats, we are, like I said, we're talking about the some of the myths and misconceptions and stuff. And one of the more interesting, I guess I need to click in for the GIF to work. There we go. There is this really interesting series of postcards for Wisconsin, not just Marathon County, but a lot of communities in the area that have streetcars, electric streetcars, trolleys, whatever you want to call them. They went by slightly different names. The one that came to my attention first was actually Neilsville. One of our volunteers, Brian, has been scanning for us for a number of years now, and he told me that his recognition of this, he grew up in the Neilsville area and Owen and Neilsville, and he was flipping through the boxes of postcards and hit this one and went, I didn't think we had a trolley in Neilsville. And sure enough, turns out, nope, there was no trolley in Neilsville. This is actually, especially when you find the other postcard without the trolley, it becomes obvious that there is no trolley in Neilsville. And once you see one, then you start to see others. I mean, some of them are a little cleaner than others, for sure. But, Mosinee here, again, well, there was a trolley going from Wassa to Rothschild, Schofield, so maybe it could have went down, but, again, no, it wasn't. Here's the actual postcard, and there's very clearly no infrastructure. The rails aren't there. The electricity, to get the motors to run, not there either. And you can find them not just in the central Wisconsin region, Montfort, Adams, Friendship, up in the sort of in logging towns up north, some of the communities down south. To be fair, there are pictures of actual trolleys, real trolleys, but there's also these really strange ones that are just not. So some of them, like this one here, you can kind of tell it's not quite right, right? The colors don't really match. There's this sort of jaggedness around it, and the lines, which sometimes they don't even bother including the lines. They're just kind of vaguely going off into space, maybe connected to a building, but sometimes they're a little bit cleaner, like this one from Adams. It's still a little bit of kind of interesting kind of frayedness on the outside of the trolley, but the colors kind of match. I mean, the size is a little different, and if you really look at it, the sort of angle doesn't quite match up. But at least you can look at this, and you'd be forgiven for not realizing immediately that this is not a real trolley. One of the giveaways here, of course, once you start looking at them, is they all seem to have, if we go back here, going back to Neilsville, here's this little sign here. It's all the same trolley. There it is again. There it is again. This is actually this trolley. This is from, with Rothschild Park. So this is one that was in operation in Wausau to Schofield to Rothschild there. And so this is kind of interesting. Now, I should say, there are other postcard makers who have done this. It's not just a Wisconsin, a Wausau thing. Particularly there's a guy apparently up in North Dakota who's making a bunch of them. It's kind of unclear why you do it, but in this case, they all kind of go back to this guy, James Colby. So a little bit about James Colby, if you're not familiar. He actually is not from here originally. He was born in Big Rapids, Michigan in 1883. His father passed away, I'm fairly certain, in around 1890, so when he was young. And his mother brought him and his older siblings to Wausau. And so he ended up going through the school system here, graduated around 1900, 1901 from the high school. Went off and got an education. I'm not entirely sure where. Some indication that maybe he went to Lawrence, down in Appleton, or maybe to one of the normal schools. But he is teaching for a few years here in the early 1900s. Here he is in front of a one-room schoolhouse. I think it's Stettin, but I'm not sure exactly where this was. So he's teaching for a little bit, but back when he was in high school, he had started to get interested in photography, this new hobby, this new, thing that people were doing. And so he ends up making that a career. By 1906, he is no longer teaching, but instead is listing himself as a professional postcard producer. And he follows that up. He does that for a few years, but by 1909, he creates the Northern Photo Company. This is one of their, they often have in their postcards this like a circle with the letters NPC. This is an earlier version. This is from the 1912. One of the big events that brought them a lot of notoriety was in some ways, events like the flood of 1912. I did a whole video on the 1912 flood if you're interested. It's a fascinating story. But here you can see them advertising, saying, go to any of the stores that sell our postcards, and you can get 2 postcards for 5 cents. What a deal. Yeah, and then also it's important to note, he married Marie Lund in 1911. And this is not just going to be a marriage, in the traditional sense of, okay, well now, she's going to take care of the home and he'll, be the breadwinner. She was intimately involved in the process of, making postcards and photography. Very much a partner in this endeavor. By 1913, there was a little bit of a fire at their studio, and they ended up after that conflicting reports of whether that was the reason or because they had their first child. But they hired some assistants at that point, around 1913. But for a few years, it was just the two of them making postcards, and this is one of the most productive eras. Excuse me, from like 1907, 08 until about 1913. They make hundreds, if not thousands, of postcards. It's pretty remarkable. Actually, probably closer to several thousand. So a little bit about how he went about his business. So here he is, a self-portrait of him with his camera. This is a 5x7 camera, so it's not really designed specifically to make postcards, but apparently he was the sort of guy who would fiddle with things and made it so that you could block off enough to print directly on the appropriate size of glass plate negative, so that they can, immediately make a photo print on a postcard from that negative. He was sort of a tinkerer. He came up with good, consistent ways to do things at a time when photography was still kind of in its infancy in some ways. Certainly, getting out to maybe more of an amateurish side of things. There's not a lot of amateur, cameras in people's homes unless you were really serious and you were willing to put the effort in, like Colby was. But yeah, he did some studio work, of course, throughout this period. But his bread and butter was definitely the postcards. Later, they would call him the postcard king of Wausau, and for good reason. So it's one of these things where I wanted to show, like, this is the postcard that you will recognize. But the thing is, there's not really one. This is one of my favorites, the Fair. We used this on a few occasions. So this is from 1908. This is a Colby postcard. He did a lot of street scenes. These are probably his best known ones, but there's not like the one that represents Colby's work. This is just one of many of downtown Wausau here. Actually, from the later years, this is probably late 20s, mid to late 20s. You see the Landmark building has been built. It was an earlier one, but still probably my favorite street scene. Outside the Opera House, the Grand Opera House on 4th Street. You get the trolleys there once again, and there's that familiar sign. Once you start to see it, you'll see this all over the postcards that he makes, not just in this area. And then he does, he doesn't just do street scenes and things like that, events like the 1909 opening of the baseball season. They had a big old parade. And so here is the parade and, taking pictures of people in action. So he does a lot of different types of things, but it wasn't, even though his studios were always in Wausau, he's traveling all over the place. This is what makes him truly unique in postcards in many ways. He is traveling, he would load up, his equipment, case of glass plate negatives and all of that, which were heavy and, clunky. Then you get on the train, this is before, I think they had an automobile pretty early, but you can't get to Glandon by road very easily, so he would take the train up to Glandon. He'd go down to Friendship and Adams. He would go basically anywhere in the area. He would do a big loop. He'd take a bunch of pictures of the operations. Here's the logging camp in Glandon. Here they are loading the logs onto a train car. So document what's happening there, take some pictures, and then apparently he would run home, take the train back to Wausau. He'd drop off the negatives. Maybe get a night's sleep, change clothes, load stuff up, and they would do it again. And then his wife, or later his assistants, would process the photographs and make postcards. And sometimes while he was away, there was like an emergence, like, oh, here's an event that happened. The train derailed or something like that. And apparently on many occasions, it was Mrs. Colby who went out to snap those pictures because he wasn't around. But because he traveled so frequently and he made so many pictures, we have these great insights into communities like Edgar, right? Not many people going out to Edgar with a photograph to take, and this is a great picture. You got the barber pole with the guy out taking a cigarette break, probably cigar, maybe, I'm not sure. The horse-drawn carriages. You got like kids playing in the street. There's a lot of really interesting character that at the time probably wasn't super unusual, but because he went out and he took pictures of Edgar, or here's the road into Athens, he took a lot of interesting pictures that are today really, really great because, nobody else is doing it. And it's also worth noting, this is a phrase that was thrown on the back of some of it for a while. It was on the back of the postcards that he would make. It's the bottom left here. This postcard is itself a photograph. And that kind of gets to the idea here. Yes, it's manufactured by James Colby, and by the way, we can, take your studio portraits if you need that. But also, that kind of gets to the idea. Postcards had become very popular at the turn of the century, in the 1800s even, because they were this kind of trendy, interesting new way to send things through the mail. You could scrawl. I mean, by this point, they had the divided sides. Originally, you could only have the one, the address and the stamp on the other, on one side, and then you could have a nice picture. And if you wanted a message, you had to scroll it in the margins or something like that. Eventually, they added the divided backs, and that allowed for a little bit more room. But it's still not a lot of room, right? The interesting part of this is you can send a message, and here's something that's been happening, or a souvenir type thing of like, I've arrived. But this also speaks to the other aspect here. This is a photograph because this, again, at a time when most people didn't have a great camera in their pocket, or even the early Kodak Brownie cameras, or those sort of things. It was very you could go and get your studio picture taken for like a wedding or a confirmation or something like that, but not many people are going to go out and take a picture of outside. Here's a group photo. But photographs that were then printed as postcards were very cheap to make. They're very quick to make, and they're very accessible. And so there's an element here of this is a time period which postcards aren't just something that you're going to make 1,000 of and have them sell over the course of many years. You could do small batches of them specifically for people. And that's what Colby ends up doing. And this is kind of indicative of a lot of the stuff that he does. Like these, I don't know who any of these people are. He did not print these with the expectation that he was going to sell, 30, 40, 50 of them, I'm sure. But he still took those pictures and he still made the postcards and they still ended up in our hands, which is a very cool process. Even if we don't know who they are, it very much captures, what's been happening at this moment. And speaking of which, the other thing is, they can also be a very easy way to document important events. Like this is the 1912 flood, one of probably thousands of photographs that were taken of the aftermath of the flood. And Colby was there, and he could get those out. There were stories about a train car derailing, and they sent out the papers sent out a reporter to kind of document it, and then by the time that they got back and submitted the article and they got it printed, and then those papers got out to the places where you go get your paper, there were already Colby postcards on the rack right next to it with pictures of the accident. So it was a very quick turnover, and it was also one of the ways that people, St. James Church, the dome collapsed in sort of a tragic accident, building accident, and they made a bunch of photographs of it because this was news. This was also sort of a dimension of the postcards during this period. And I think it's not just that. Specifically, Colby had a way of taking pictures that were just great. And here's just some examples here. So we talked about the baseball parade briefly here. He also took this one of the parade, looking as it passed the Hotel Bellis in downtown Wausau. You can see the sign here. Maybe you can read that here. It says, "Baseball Today." So the parade went through, people gathered. But earlier in the day, this is in the afternoon, he had already been there and taken a picture that same day. You can still see that sign, "Baseball Today." And even though this is just a picture of the Hotel Bellis, which, that could be kind of interesting. You stayed there, maybe you wanted a souvenir of your time there. The awning is down, but he still made sure that there were people. They got the kids on the stoop. There's people walking by. It adds a dimension. Like all of his pictures have that sort of feel to it. And even when he's traveling up in Glandon, he's making sure that he's taking pictures of like the Glee Club. He didn't need to do that. He didn't need to take a picture of Chester and Sherman outside the building, but he did. And now Chester and Sherman, I don't know who's who in this situation, but the two of them are now immortalized in our archives as being, there. Why not? He's an Edgar. There's also sort of a humor to this. Like, yeah, he's an Edgar, and there's a big event that happens. I don't know what this event was. I don't know if this is the same sort of visit even. I'm sure he visited a few times. But there's some sort of speech or event that's happening and all these people are gathering, and he decides to name it A Quiet Day in Edgar. There's sort of wry humor in that, in the way that he approached his compositions, with the sort of artistry that he did this, but also humor in his subjects that often comes through. And that's one of the reasons that I think Colby is one of the more beloved ones. And, hey, he's in Wittenberg. Who else is going to take a picture of that new pickle factory and potato house? Well, Colby did. Made sure that he did. Also in Wittenberg, he took pictures of the government Indian school buildings. This is about as close as that he gets. I don't think they let him on the area. I don't know specifically what the circumstances are, but this is an area that I don't think there were many people in Wausau where he did most of his business, or even here in Wittenberg. I don't know that the graduates of the Indian school are going to be too excited to have a souvenir of their time here, from everything I know about it. Yeah, but he took pictures anyway. And I think there's also an element, in addition to the artistry, in addition to the humor that he had and his, the way he did this, the only quote that I can find ever attributed to him in the papers or anywhere else, at least in my looking, is four simple words. We forget too quickly. And I think there is an element to this. He was not just a guy taking pictures to sell, make a buck by selling, or maybe a nickel at a time here, selling postcards. He went out of these places because he wanted to document that they were there. And that, I think, is an important aspect here to his character as well. Speaking of remembering, you can do this different ways. You can take pictures of places that wouldn't normally get talked about, or you can make specifically souvenirs, which he did here for the United Commercial Travelers Convention. This is basically the traveling salespeople had a convention here in Wausau in 1910. And you can see here, getting back more to the photo manipulation that he's doing, this guy is clearly not this tall. He superimposed another picture onto a street scene. Here's another one from that series. Brotherly love. This is the same guy in two different poses. This is kind of interesting. And there's, again, humor here, soda water. Like, maybe didn't age necessarily like it speaks, but there's something here. It kind of reminds me of these pictures that I found. This is also from the James Colby collection. So I should clarify. After Colby died in 1960, later in the 60s, his family gave the Historical Society a good number of postcards that were left over that had never been mailed, things like these, and also glass plate negatives. Not every photo that he's ever taken. In fact, many of them are not. But they include, excuse me, take a drink here. They include some glass plate negatives from this guy. This is William Johnson, who was a teacher. I think if Colby went to Lawrence University, he might have been a classmate of his. I'm not entirely sure. But while he was at Lawrence, and this is, I think, afterwards, after he came back, he also, helps out with, I don't know if he's a full-blown employee, one of the assistants, but he helped Colby with some of the stuff. And certainly they were friends. And here he is, this is an attempt to try to put two pictures in one. Using glass plate negatives again, they took two pictures. You can see where it's been split. And I know it's kind of hard to tell, but he's kind of going back with a snowball. So he's going to catch himself unaware. Here's another version of this, maybe a little bit more serious here. He's sharpening a saw blade here, or no, he's cutting through a log, and then there he is waiting with an axe behind him. And these sort of experiments were something that they were doing, around the turn of the century. Again, speaking of Johnson, here he is on the left, and one of his classmates, experimenting with some of the photography methods that were available, which, to be fair, I mean, there were other people at this period of time. Like, photo manipulation is not new. In fact, going back to the early mid to late 1800s, there were people who were maybe making use of the ability to fool people with photographic means like this to say, hey, I can show you proof that your loved one is still here, and I'll just superimpose somebody vaguely behind you in a picture, or things like that, like hucksters and people that were trying to take advantage of other people using fakes. Now, Colby doesn't do that, right? Colby, Johnson, they bring this, and instead they make stuff like this. Again, going back to that humor, to the artistry here. He's going to kind of perfect this, and he's going to do, fun stuff. Again, souvenirs. This sells better, I guess, particularly by like the 19-teens. I think we had moved away from those sort of methods, but still. Also, just some fun pictures here too. And again, going back to the artistry here, this isn't intended to fool anybody that this guy is actually this big, but this is tough to do at this point in time. You can still see, by the way, that if you look at this skyline here, skies are hard to do with postcards, especially if you're trying to combine things. They didn't really capture that nice. I should point out as well, all of Colby's stuff pretty much is all in black and white. He did have some others colorize them and he sort of re-release them that sometimes he's included on, but for the most part, he's a black and white guy. So that blue sky doesn't quite come through in the same way, but even though, it's a little rough here, the idea is still pretty cool. Here's one that's a little executed a little bit better. Yeah, very cool. And also fun to find when you're a new hire and didn't know anything about this, as I did, and just flipped through and went, what's this? But yeah, there you are. So how do you do this is an interesting question. So I'm going to tell you how I thought, and I talked to people, photograph people, history people, and we kind of hit upon this understanding, just like the Lawrence University kids fooling around, where you take two images and you kind of cut the glass in half and then kind of put them together and do it that way. There's sort of a little bit more thing here. So let's say here is a postcard that Colby took up in Black Oak Resort on the state line, now Land O'Lakes. Let's say, and clearly there's no trolley here, right? But what if I wanted to put one there? Well, the way that I would do this, and the way that we thought and think he did some of these, and other people did, is first you take another postcard, right? You take a postcard with a trolley. Then you, in this case, I'm doing it in Photoshop, but you would take the glass plate negative and you would scrape away all of the emulsion, all of the stuff, except for the things you wanted to do. So you just kind of remove it, so it's just the trolley and the rails. And maybe you could do, all of this. I didn't do all of the rigging, but if you wanted to, you could do that too. Then you take that glass plate, which now has set transparency around it, and you place it on top of the other transparency. And here I adjusted the color a little bit to make it a little bit more believable. I mean, that's pretty good relative to what they were doing back then. You're limited, of course, by the angle. I had Photoshop, so I could kind of shift things a little bit to make it the angle fit a little bit better. But sometimes you just, hey, let's just see if this will work. And what do you have to lose? A glass plate negative of a resort up on the state line, which, there's probably not a huge demand for after 5-10 years of sitting on this. Why not try it? And so that's what they could have done. And then that's what I was going to say. And then on Tuesday, I was going through and looking for some images for the program, and I hit upon this. Okay, so I'm gonna, well, this is, I have this on a table here. So this is on a light box. As I said, we do have a collection of glass plate negatives, not comprehensive, but as I was going through, kind of flipped there. As I was going through it, I found we did have one. And actually, I'm just going to stand up and show you what it looks like. I'm going to walk away from the microphone real quick here. So this is another one. Hopefully you can see that okay. Oop. Shouldn't look at the camera. Here, just do this. But it actually is, it's one sheet. So it is one glass pane. Let's go back to the, yeah. So it's one glass pane, which makes me realize, I think we realized that what they actually were doing is they were taking the print that they would have, they would actually physically cut out the trolley, put it on top of it, and then they would take a picture of that, and that would be the basis for this. But however they were doing it, and I'm sure that the process evolved over the years, they were able to get some really interesting stuff. So here is that trolley. I guess I didn't advance it here, but these are the two that I just showed you. I'm sure it won't match up in the view that I gave you, but yeah, interesting. So yeah, with this method, or with whatever method he was using, he was able to put trolleys onto street scenes like Neillsville, which also, interestingly, he did things like airplanes. A lot less common from what we can find, but this is the Schwister airplane. It looks okay until you kind of adjust the gamma here. It's very clear that, you cut around it. I think that's one of the reasons he doesn't do this very frequently, because it's a lot harder to blend. Interestingly, the Schwister airplane did actually fly in Neilsville. This is that airplane at the fairgrounds there. That's kind of interesting. But he also tried this in a couple other places like Wausau. Blends a little bit better here, but it's still kind of awkward. Here's another one in Ogima. It's a little bit better. It's a different angle. Although you have to wonder why all these people walking underneath this of a plane, 40 feet above you, I would be a little concerned. So that kind of gives it away too, that they're not looking up. But yeah, I think in either case, I think like Ogima, this is not going to be a big moneymaker for Colby. Once he made an initial print and he sold a couple of them, it's probably not going to be something that he's going to continue to come back to. So why not experiment and see what you can do? Because you can make some fun stuff there. And I think that is ultimately where we land on James Colby. He ends up continuing to make postcards until about 1927, when the postcard market kind of fell off. Of course, people are still making postcards to this day, and it doesn't disappear, although I think the business model changes. I would say, by the late 20s, it was a lot easier to get your hands on a camera. So you could, take your own pictures and get them developed. You didn't need to have this expertise in chemistry and the process that Colby had to go through to be able to take pictures back, 30 years earlier. So with that in mind, and the novelty of the postcard itself as a medium, you can only put a couple lines on there. I think ultimately that kind of led to it shifting. People are making postcards, but they're mostly about like, here's the stuff that you're going to remember, a souvenir of your trip to the Chicago, World's Fair, or actually it's a bad example because that was in the 1800s. But similar things like a convention, or maybe just like the courthouse or the depot or something that's going to be very recognizable, as opposed to street scenes of here's the approach to Athens or the bridge at Knowlton or things like that. So Colby shifts. He does a lot of studio work. He still does take pictures until he closes in 1954. He retires and ends up having some health concerns that eventually lead to his death in 1960. But all in all, it's a very interesting story, and the legacy here, as I hopefully have communicated here, this isn't just somebody who took a bunch of postcards. He took a lot of postcards. I had to pick and choose, and it was very difficult. I already put probably too many in here. So he was very prolific. And not just prolific, but he had an eye for it. He really took great pictures on a lot of different scales, however you want to measure that. But also there is that humor, there is that experimentation that comes through with these postcards that never actually were in the places that they were. So yeah, that's the program I have for today. I'm gonna see if anybody has any questions or comments. This is your chance to put that in there if you haven't already. But while I'm doing that, let me just tell you about what's happening next week. We're taking an interesting little take here. Some of you may have heard of those secret tunnels that are apparently all over downtown Wausau or other places, in which they were, used to secretly move, illicit booze from building to building to escape raids during Prohibition. Well, as we will probably definitely get into next week, it's a little bit more complicated, and it's not quite so scandalous as that. In fact, most of these tunnels that are supposedly down there, probably not what the rumors make them seem to be. But we'll take a look at those stories and actually get to the real story of what was it like to be in a place like Wausau, a place like Marathon County during those years of Prohibition. So Gary Gisselman will be back to explore that topic with you, and that'll be a fun program. So yeah. Let me just restart this so I get the nice image. Let's see, any comments, questions, clarifications, etc. Okay. Well, I'm seeing Marianne wrote in saying she's from Seattle, so glad I was able to provide a an interesting story for those of you who are here and no longer in the area. That's always the goal. All right. Well, I think we're about at the time to stop anyway. So I think I'll maybe sign off here. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time with some more, questionable history. Our April Foolish month continues. April Fool's month, I should say. We still have another week here, so we'll look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, have a wonderful week, and we will see you later.